Yep, it looks like it is broadcasting. And okay, welcome everybody to the College Fairs of Greater Denver and this Colorado virtual college fair and the information session about highly selective colleges. I am your facilitator, Earl Macomb from StriveScan, and with me today is Zach Evans from the University of Chicago, Corinne Smith from McGill University, and Mark Dudley from Duke University. A couple of housekeeping reminders, and then I'm going to let them take the show from here. You can use the Q&A button to type your questions to the presenters at any time. Your camera and microphone are off, so you are muted and the panelists cannot hear you. I want to remind you to sign up for more sessions as slots are open and many other sessions are available. And we will be recording this particular session and will be available online. The recording will be available online where you registered for the session. So without further ado, Zach, Corinne, and Mark, I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to make sure we're ready to go. So everybody should be able to see this now. So if you're signed in for this session, this is the Highly Selective Colleges panel. And I'm going to move us forward here, and I'm going to ask Mark to go ahead and introduce himself.
Yeah, well, good evening or good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you. My name is Mark Dudley. I'm an assistant director at Duke. And again, welcome to our panel tonight.
I'm assuming everybody can probably actually see my little thing coming down here. So I'm going to mute myself on my personal mic moving forward. But I'm Zach Evans, Deputy Director of Admissions at the University of Chicago, a 2011 graduate of the college, and I've been in admissions there for 7 years.
Hi everyone, my name is Corinne Smith. I'm a Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at Yale University. This is my 5th year in Yale admissions, and before that I spent 2 years in Northwestern's admissions office.
All right, and I'm going to reshare this in a different way that allows me to, okay, that should be better. So thank you all for joining us. We're so excited here to learn from us. This is the kind of agenda here. We actually want to keep the presentation part kind of short because we want to spend as much time as possible answering your questions. And since there are just the 3 of us here, as you're submitting questions, know that when we get to the Q&A portion, we'll start pulling those out and grabbing those. And especially if we see some similarly themed questions, we'll make sure to try to hit as many of those as possible. But what we want to start with is just kind of defining what it means to be highly selective, even provide a little bit of data to give you some context of what it's like in the higher ed world of selective admissions. And then we'll jump into really defining holistic admissions and the different contextual pieces we take into consideration. And finally, make sure we provide some important definitions around what's inside the application, and then finish with describing what it means to find, fit, and build your college list in the world of selective admissions. Now, I'm getting us started, which is why I'm currently talking, and I'm throwing a chart at you right away. But I think the easiest definition to think about with selective admissions is that any school that has to say no to even one student is selective and has to find some process by which they choose students to attend their university. So that's really the most basic way to think about selectivity. Now, what makes a school selective is often based on, of course, interest in that institution, the size of the school, and the size of their class. But one of the things that often gets, I think, overthought about maybe in this process is that you read the news and it seems like every institution is unbelievably impossible to get into or super, super duper selective, which is just kind of wrong, especially when you look at some of the numbers. So we're all private, nonprofit institutions, and yes, we are highly selective. That is what this conversation is about. But you'll note here from this chart that only 20% of private nonprofit institutions even have an admit rate under 50%. And it's not on the slide here, but about 75% of students in the last year actually got admitted to their first choice university. And so the world of college admissions is usually not as crazy as you think it is. And that's why thinking about different types of institutions is going to be really important, because in all bands of selectivity, you're going to find fantastic institutions and schools. But we're going to dive deeper into some of the more selective pieces, given this is the session that you signed up for. But I think it's important to know kind of what the world of higher ed looks like. Now, when we think about those super selective schools that many students think of, there are a few that always come to mind. We've obviously put our numbers on here, but I also thought through the fact that it might be helpful for you to all see, what other types of institutions are selective and how do these numbers change depending on the schools that you're looking at. And so looking at schools that have 30 or 40,000 applications might seem certainly intimidating, which is again why we think about balance in your college list. But some of these factors are also again based on number of applicants, the number of admits, but also the yield rate of the school. So how many students choose to accept their offer of admission if admitted, and of course the size of the school. And so Colorado College and Air Force Academy right here, right there in the state of, we're all over the country here, in the state of Colorado, also very selective institutions, different applicant numbers, but the sizes of the school are going to play a factor there. Deep Springs only gets 300 applicants a year. And I say only, and yet with 14 or 15 students ends up being one of the most selective institutions in the country. And so you can certainly see a variety of different things here in terms of the number of students and how it all plays out. And I'll note that these things shift over time. I represent the University of Chicago. Back in the 1990s, I think we yielded about 30% of our students. We got about 9,000 or 10,000 applicants. So we'd have to admit about half of our students who applied in order to get the class size that we're looking for. So note that these things change over time, and where we're at right now is a reflection of a number of different things that we're going to talk through in terms of the type of ways that you apply to the college. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of a sense of the landscape of selectivity leading into our conversation about how we actually go about selecting our students. And for that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Corinne from Yale.
Thanks, Zach. That was so helpful. And you identified a bunch of schools that I really love and think are wonderful institutions. I think it's important to understand that all of the schools that we're talking about, all these highly selective institutions, when we get these applications, whether it's 300 or 10,000 or 35,000, now about 80% of those applicants are academically qualified, could do the work at our institutions, have been involved in areas outside of the classroom, right? And so it's impossible for us to read 35,000 applications and have about 2,000, 2,500 spots at our university and just fill it based on certain academic or extracurricular credentials. And so all of these highly selective institutions are going to use something called holistic or whole person review in their admissions process. And that means that we're looking at every single piece of information that you provide in your application. We're reviewing it, we're taking it into consideration, and that happens before a decision is made. So there's no time when I open a file and I say GPA, test score, you're in or you're out, or we're going to keep reading or we're not. We're looking at you in a much larger scope than that. And so here you can see some of the pieces that we take into consideration. First and foremost, we are looking at every student in the context of their own background, their neighborhood, their high school that they come from. We know that schools are very different. They might have different GPA scales or curriculums or activities that they offer. I cover states all over the United States, and so I can't say that I expect the same thing from a student in the western slopes of Colorado as I do from a student in Nashville, Tennessee, as I do from a student in Detroit, Michigan. I'm looking at you within the context of what you had. If it wasn't available to you in your high school or in your neighborhood, then I don't expect for you to have found it or done it some way or somehow. So first and foremost, every application is looked at with that background and context. And then we're going to look at these other pieces that are all equally important. At a highly selective institution, you might be the best ever at one thing, but if you aren't good at those other pieces, then you're probably not going to stand out or be a fit in our application process. And so just in the order that makes the most sense in my head, again, they're all equally important. First, academics. When I say that, usually we're going to say, all right, what GPA do you need? What test score do you need? Doesn't work that way for us. There's no average, there's no minimum. Again, we're looking at your whole application, and academics goes well beyond that. So the first thing that we're looking at in academics is your transcript. What classes did you take? How did you do in them? Did you challenge yourself? Did you take the most rigorous curriculum available to you? Did you maybe start out a little rocky in your freshman year, but you found your footing and challenged yourself and got good grades, and senior year you're knocking it out of the park, right? We care about that too. We will look at GPA, but GPA scales at different high schools could be on a 4.0, 4.5, 5, 7, 10, 20, 100. I have a school in Michigan that grades in thumbs up, and there's a school in New York that grades in smiley faces. And so we're truly not comparing high schools to each other. We'll look at your curriculum. Does your school offer AP, IB, dual enrollment, honors, college prep? None of those things. Everyone just takes the same. That's also very contextual to your high school. Additionally, we're going to look at your extracurricular activities. Were you involved in things outside of the classroom? You don't need to be the president, captain, leader of 8 or 10 different things, but we are looking to see, were you engaged in a couple of things that you really cared about? Did you maybe take on a leadership role? We do need introverts, we do need extroverts, we do need leaders, we do need followers. We all have hundreds of student organizations on our campus, so we can't just admit the student body president from every single school. That would not give us a very diverse extracurricularly institution. We have to fill all those organizations. Letters of recommendation. This is where you don't really have to worry too much or have too much control. Just ask professors or teachers that like you. That's the best advice I can give. Academic subject areas, pro tip, maybe 2 different areas so that we can see what you're like in different parts of learning and different classroom styles. And then your essays. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but essays is really the piece that by the time you're applying in senior year, you have the most control over. And so you can't go back and change that grade from your freshman year. You can't add 10 activities senior year. You don't know what anyone's going to write about you, but you can focus on these essays and showing us who you are. And so interviews here, it depends on the institution. This year's also really funny, but if a school has them, if they're evaluative, that could be one additional piece that we might consider. If we go to the next slide, Zach, that'd be awesome. So here, I just wanted to talk about some things that have and haven't changed in the pandemic that we're in. So first of all, context has always mattered. We've always looked at applications in that sense, like who you are, what, again, your school and your neighborhood look like, what opportunities that you have. Holistic admissions in that way has not changed. Now, some institutions, Yale included, have gone test optional for this year, and that's truly optional. If a student has a test they feel good about, they want to submit it, it's another piece that we can evaluate. If they don't submit anything this year, we're just assuming that they couldn't take the exam. And so beyond that, really nothing has changed in how we are evaluating applications this year. We do think it's important that you all kind of just accept that applications are going to look a little bit different. And we have done the same. We know that some schools might not have had grades last semester. They might have gone pass fail or credit no credit. We know that exams were canceled. We know that some schools just ended in March and that was it. We know that a lot of your activities probably were canceled last year and might not even be happening this year. It might be pushed till spring. That is okay. There's no need to stress about that. That's kind of the least important piece of what's happening right now. We first and foremost want to make sure that you and your family are healthy and that everything is okay. Don't stress about this so much because everyone around the world is dealing with the same thing. That does give you, though, kind of time to reflect on what is important to you and possibly embrace some new opportunities that are coming your way. You might not be able to do activities that you traditionally did before, but what are you spending your time on now? And that doesn't mean that you have to do things to build your resume or use COVID as a way to get into college. But we are still wondering, what are you doing when you're not studying or potentially helping your family or your community? We do really encourage keeping up with those testing policies and our different websites. Every school is different. but every school should have a COVID or pandemic response page that they're getting to. And then finally, understand that we are evolving too. We don't have the answer to every single thing right now. As my Dean of Admissions says, we're kind of building the plane as we fly it, and coming up with everything that we need to do as we're doing it. And so give us a little flexibility, be kind in the process, know that we'll help you the best we can. But really, if you take away anything from this part, please know that application review is a really thorough process. There's no secret formula to getting in. And at the end of the day, the biggest thing that we're considering is fit for our unique institution and our programs. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to talk a little bit more about what that means.
Great. All right. Thanks, Corinne. Good intro here. We've sort of learned about what highly selectives are and how the evaluation process is going to work. So we're going to talk just a few procedural items about how you can maybe include one on your list if it is on your list, and then also about how you apply. So starting with that first point here, when it comes down to looking at colleges and universities, there are going to be a lot of institution-specific situations and deadlines and requirements here. So it's important that you take your time and you also identify your list and then see what they're looking for, when they're looking for it, and what they require of applicants. So one question students will ask is, how do we apply to a highly selective institution or otherwise? You're going to find that highly selective institutions fall along the whole spectrum here of different applications. There are sort of two main types. And the first one is going to be a group application. That means that these applications are accepted by multiple institutions. So ones you might be familiar with or you've heard of is Common Application, which has about 800 or so different colleges and universities. The Coalition Application has many dozen. The Universal College Application has about 3. Also, the Quest Bridge program is a way to access many highly selective institutions, about 40 or so on that list. And then many state institutions will also have applications you can use across all campuses of a state system. The opposite of the group ones are going to be the individual ones. So many highly selective institutions and other institutions as well might have their own application. Now, the best way to find out about any of these is just go to that college or university's website, and you'll find out information about which specific application or applications they use. Now with that, you're going to find that there are a number of different notification plans. And these are times and stipulations under which you can apply to a specific university. Now I know you're probably familiar with some of these terms. There are some differences. They are meaningful differences between them. You might hear about a rolling admissions plan. And essentially what that means is that universities are evaluating applications as they come in. So in that case, there might be an incentive to look at it earlier, knowing that there might be a limited number of spaces that are available. And once they're full, they're full. So they evaluate applications as they come in. They make and release decisions along the way. The opposite of that are going to be date and deadline required application deadlines. So generally speaking, you're going to see a couple of these. You're going to see early of some type and regular. Now, all universities, again, are going to be a little bit different. So take some time, do some homework here. But when we look at it, we can see a number of different early plans. You might see early decision. You might see early action. It might be early decision 1, early decision 2, early action 1, early action 2. Again, there's a lot of these that are coming online right now. But generally speaking, what we're looking at is any sort of a binding commitment. So typically speaking, at many places, an early decision program is a binding program. So that means that if you apply early, you are committing to attend should you be admitted. That's in contrast to a regular decision plan, which typically has no such binding stipulation. Now, an early action plan, again, it's going to be a little bit different at a lot of different places, is a way to apply early and find out a decision early without that binding stipulation. So again, the best place to find out what plans your school might use is that school's website, and then look into some specific information. Because again, there's going to be a lot of nuances and a lot of tweaks. But with this or anything else in the process, you should always feel free to call or email or reach out to that office with those specific follow-up questions. And as you are going through the application, you might also see transfer as another option. And typically speaking, that's for students who have already begun a college journey at a different institution and are looking to apply to transfer to a different institution. I go to the next slide, please. So when it comes down to the application itself, I know Corinne did a great job of overviewing what we do within these holistic processes. We're looking at a lot of things. The item itself that you're going to sort of in many ways begin with is that application. So whichever one it uses, it doesn't really matter. All of the colleges that have the varieties have put those out there because they're comfortable with any of these coming to them as the application. They're typically going to ask for a number of very similar things. So on the application itself, there's going to be information about your personal situation. So your background, your family, where you're coming from, your academic history. So that's typically the high school or schools or other academic experiences that you've had. And you can also indicate what your academic plans might be. Should you be admitted and enrolled at an institution, you can often let them know what you would like to study and what areas of involvement you might want to have. There's going to be a section to list extracurriculars, maybe sometimes even upload a resume. And this is pretty typically limited here by the number you're able to upload. So always be selective and be reflective with what you're choosing as that part. Now the essays, again, this is another area where there's going to be a lot of institutional variation. Most common, you're going to find that applications require a personal essay. So a common application, the other ones as well, have a personal essay that many colleges do require of applicants. There's going to be a number of different prompts. Those prompts are completely yours to choose. It's just a way for us to get a better sense of where you're coming from and some unique aspect of yourself that would be a great way to have, more information about you as an individual from a couple of pieces of paper that are the application. You're going to find a number of different other ones. They're all going to be school specific here. Some schools might have a supplement. Supplements may or may not be required, and these are often in the form of an essay. Something new this year that the Common Application and many other applications have is a COVID or community disruption statement. And that's your opportunity to let us know how the past 8 to 10 months or so have had an impact not only on your schooling environment, but also other things in your life as well. You're going to find many universities will have optional supplemental essays, and these are those optional pieces. So if you feel like your application is incomplete without them, take advantage of them. But when universities say a piece is optional, that doesn't mean it's required, truly. So if you want to take advantage of it, if you feel like your application is incomplete without taking advantage of it, that is why it's there. If it's not part of your process or your plan, that's perfectly fine as well. And then another great tool and resource is the additional information section. So as Corinne mentioned earlier, we really do focus on a person review. And a lot of times there are a lot of student-specific situations and experiences that may or may not be able to be conveyed from the other parts of the application. So the additional information section is your time to just let us know in plain words if there's something else we should know that wasn't already captured in the other parts of the application. If you look at an early decision plan, specifically a binding plan, you're going to find that there is that ED agreement, that is that binding commitment and pledge. And then there are also some application affirmations, which are just mainly involving privacy and rights to your application and access. So that's what you're going to find within that actual application file itself that is supplemented by all of the other pieces in the holistic review that Corinne mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So now something to quickly talk about here that I know you've heard about, and we really do emphasize this as well, is the idea of college fit. I mean, this is one of those buzz terms that often gets thrown around, but it's a really important part of your process. And for many of you, a highly selective institution might be part of your college landscape, and that's fine. And we want to talk a little bit about some of these factors because once we go down the line here, highly selective institutions are going to fall in the whole set of range of each of these categories and criteria. So when you work on fit, essentially you're looking at some of the aspects and characteristics and attributes about a particular institution and whether or not that's where you envision yourself having a 4-year experience. So if you're not entirely sure yet, I mean, you're in a great place coming from Colorado. Right around you, you're going to find institutions of all of these types, everything from small liberal arts institutions to very large public institutions, private, nonprofit, religious, the whole range of institutions is right at your fingertips. So when you're thinking about that landscape, just think about home, think about the Centennial State. That gives you a pretty good idea. But as far as the things that go into a fit, some of the characteristics and attributes you might want to consider, one you might hear is about the academic institution type. So there's a lot of different research out there from institutions out there, from a research university to a liberal arts institution, or maybe some sort of blended spectrum. So that sort of involves the nature of the undergraduate instruction, the focus of the faculty, and a lot of those experiences that students are going to have. So again, highly selectives are going to fall in all of those characteristics. You can also find that there are art and design schools and technical and trade schools as well. So as you're thinking about the type of institution, the learning environment that you envision yourself in, that's a really important one to focus on. Community and the community of the institution is another highly important factor as well. So things like this, we're talking about maybe an HBCU system or tribal universities, women's colleges, All of these institutions all across the country are going to have different experiences and different offerings and opportunities for students as well. And for many of you, that might be something on your list. Religious institutions, service institutions, military institutions, these are other types of communities within the institutions that you might be looking at. And then another important distinction might be a private or a public institution as well. Think about the location of the colleges on your list. Is this a place that you can envision spending a four-year experience? Do you want to have a small university experience, or do you want to have a very large, or maybe something in the middle there? Look into some of the academic offerings and opportunities and how they back this up with support staff and resources. What are some of those community experiences that you're looking for? Clubs, organizations, athletic experiences, anything in between. These are going to be varied school to school. So find some institutions and look into it to see if that's going to be housed at an institution you might be applying to. Financial aid and financial support is another very important part of this conversation. I understand that this is one that will often be around that dinner table. So take advantage of the tools and resources that colleges are putting out there to see if a number of institutions are an opportunity and available to you with their financial support that they provide. And then finally, a lot of students will talk about balancing the different type of institution based upon their admissions statistics and criteria. So it's important to have a balance here. We never want a student to only look at highly selective institutions. And when we say this, highly selective institutions really are reach institutions for all students who apply. So it's important to have a balance, a list here. And you're going to find that a lot of counselors talk about this in different ways, but we're talking about balancing those reach institutions where overwhelming majority of students are unfortunately turned away, and finding some institutions that might be a target for you, where your statistics and sort of overall involvements and quantitative pieces fit well within the middle range of the students admitted at that institution. And then other likely institutions as well, an institution where you can look at and feel fairly confident that you would be admitted. So all of these things are going to vary school to school. You have a lot of time in this process. Take that time if you can to do a little bit of research into these and other aspects so that when you do work on your application process, you have narrowed down to that good list that really focuses on institutions that are a good fit for you.
Okay, well, that's the formal part, just the overview that we really wanted to cover for everybody here. And thanks to those who've been submitting questions to us. We've got, I think, about 17 minutes to try to answer as many as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and throw out the first question that I'm happy to answer. And then I think as we go through these questions, you might hear multiple of us jump in on answers, but also sometimes we agree on a lot. And so that also works in our favor. But I've seen this question come up a couple times, which is that students are hearing a lot about students who are just admitted in this past year taking gap years or asking for deferrals and concerned over whether or not that's going to impact the upcoming year's admissions process. Now, I can certainly speak specifically to the University of Chicago. We did see an uptick in the number of students asking for gap years. It was not a ridiculous amount. We've also been growing as an institution. And so we're making some adjustments with our process this year and with some things with the size of the college. So we don't anticipate a major shift in the number of, in our admit rate this year based on any deferrals or gap year requests that have come in currently. So in short, if that's a concern you have, I think that you should put that out of your mind as being a major concern for any of the schools you're interested in. Anybody else can jump in here, but everything I've heard is that that's usually not going to be a major factor in a lot of highly selective institutions, but I can definitely speak to UChicago on that front.
Yeah, I'll echo that. We typically have about 60 to 80 gap year requests. This year we had 350, and that's because we wanted to be as accommodating and as easy as possible. But we didn't fill in any of those slots with waitlisted students. And so this year's class is just smaller. Next year we're admitting the same number of students, and then we're going to add those gap year students to that. And we'll just have a larger class next year and then level it out after that. So no impact over here. I think Mark agrees with us, but
I agree with all of that, and I'll just leave it there.
Awesome. I'll take the next question that kind of aligns with what I was talking about a little bit. James asked a follow-up question, asking what means we use to evaluate a student's background and the type of community that they come from. And I think that that's a really good question. And I think that Mark actually answered a lot of that in his part of the presentation. You're actually giving us most of that information. You're telling us what your school is, what your family looks like. Do you have siblings? Do you not? Are your parents married? Are they divorced? Did your parents attend college? Did they not? Those pieces all come into play. But in addition to that, it's important to know that every single high school will submit to us something called a school report that kind of details the type of programs they have, what your curriculum looks like. If you have APs, do you have 4 or do you have 24? Types of extracurriculars you might have, and even the neighborhood, right? Are you in a rural, suburban, or urban area? And so we, year after year, this is my 4th year covering Colorado, I get familiar with lots of schools. So I don't even have to look at that a lot of times because I'm aware. But if it was my first year or if it was a school I never heard of, I can always kind of go to that school report to learn more about your context.
Okay, great. And the question I saw here was about the binding stipulation of an early plan and what a family's financial situation might deal with that. This is a great question to ask. And when it comes down to it, I want to really lead with the resources that are provided. So this is something I did not have when I was applying to college many years ago. But colleges are working to be very transparent with what a likely situation is going to be for your family. So before you decide whether or not to go ahead and apply to a binding early program, you should be using a couple of tools that are available on the college website, specifically a net price calculator, which is something on their financial support page, or maybe other calculators and estimators such as My Intuition, which is another tool that's available. So with information about your family situation, you're going to get a very accurate estimate of what a likely aid package is going to be. That's a great place to start there. So for a lot of families, we really want that to be at the lead of the conversation. But it's important to note that these are just estimator tools. So there's always going to be individual and family variations here. With our universities and many other colleges as well, we encourage applicants to contact us. So if you have started with one of those calculator tools online, and if you have any questions or concerns about the information you see there, call us, email us. They will talk you through this process and really talk about your family situation and what a likely expected package is going to be for your institution. Now, the institutions here, many other institutions as well, we are very focused on need-based sources of financial support for families here. In fact, we never want a family to not be able to access the experiences at our college due to financial support. So you're going to find that the resources at all of our institutions are vast. We have a lot of commitments, we have a lot of opportunities, and we have a lot of programs. So talk to us, use these calculator tools as you are looking at the institutions, and also see what sources of funding that we do have available. So starting there really is where we want to talk about when we talk about this binding commitment there. So when it comes down to it though, if you use these tools and you get that estimate and you follow up with our offices and you feel comfortable about it, but you're admitted and then you ultimately decide that this is not a situation your family will be able to take care of, contact us, call us. In a limited small number of cases, we do release families from these situations. It's always a personal conversation, but in the end of the day, we're not going to be dragging you to campus if it's something that your family just cannot afford. But in all things, from the very earliest part of your research to getting that admissions letter, being in communication with our staff is the best way to stay on top of these and other questions.
Great. So I'm seeing several questions come in related to testing, being test optional, and how that might be impacting the admissions process. So thanks to Alexander and Ashley and a number of others who've submitted different variations of similar questions. And I think what's important to note is that hundreds of colleges who were previously not test optional have announced their test optional this year. And have also made a commitment as a group to say that test optional really means test optional. So for the questions that have asked, are your chances of admission actually better if you're submitting testing? The purpose of going test optional is to allow students the opportunity to present themselves in whatever way they feel they can be best represented. And whether that includes testing or not is up to them. And for most students, not most, but for many students, testing is not an option because of COVID-19 and closed test centers. And so we reevaluate our reading process so that students who do submit testing or don't submit testing are evaluated on a level playing field. So it's a personal choice. You all have individual backgrounds with whether or not you've had access to testing. You know how you've performed in your high school. You understand your rigor. So as much as it's our job to learn that context, that's something you know front and center in terms of your abilities and how you want to present yourself in the college process. I know I saw another part of that question, which is, are you still eligible for merit scholarships if a school offers them? You were just hearing from Mark, there are a lot of institutions that focus very heavily on need-based aid. But for those schools that offer merit, I'm to speak very generally at UChicago, we do have merit and need-based aid. You'd still be eligible for merit without testing. But I would imagine that schools that had previously required testing probably have offered some flexibility, but you'll want to check with each institution that you're looking at.
I'm going to take a great question that came in from Brandon, who asked, if applicants were to contact admissions officers individually, do admissions officers like us actually take that into consideration? This is a great question, and I'm going to start off by defining a term. So there's something called demonstrated interest in the college admissions process that some schools will track or care about in the process. And so demonstrated interest could be anything from visiting a campus, attending a college fair, attending a high school visit, emailing, calling admissions offices. And some schools might say, you know, you visited campus, or we came to you and you went to that session. That's the most interest you can show. And some schools might say, we care about every single email and phone call that you give our office. Now, our institutions, at least Yale for sure, does not track any demonstrated interest. Is that the same for you all as well? You can answer. Yep, none of us track demonstrated interest. And so that means that if you have a question, particularly about your school or something very specific to the regions that we read, you could reach out to our offices. We all have ways to contact us on our websites. It might get directed to me. I might be the one for Colorado that answers that. But we're not looking for pen pals. Emailing me 20 times is not going to get you into Yale. Calling our office every day is not going to get you into Yale. It is not something that we are looking at in the process, because we know that a lot of students aren't able to visit, aren't able to attend those events because right now they might be in class, right? And so we do not track that. So don't feel like you need to do it.
I saw several great questions about early decision and should a student do it? Are there any advantages to doing it, or maybe any downsides? So early decision really should be a personal choice. And we travel and we talk with a lot of high schools and high school counselors. And I feel like the perception, if you were to ask students of what is the percentage of high school students who apply early somewhere, they would probably say 90%. But when we actually talk to schools and counselors, the percentage who apply early somewhere is less than half. So it's really a question of if this is your plan. You know, if you have an institution that is really high on your list, consider an early option. I mean, you might have a situation where you're actually done with your college search before winter break, you know, which could be pretty nice. So it really comes down to your personal fit here. So if you can imagine attending a place, and the scenario is you're admitted to this one school and maybe to no others, you know, or you're pretty happy about that, or you're pretty excited to start on that campus that upcoming year, then maybe consider an early decision plan. Now, it's going to vary a little bit school to school. That's a common answer here, I realize. But when it comes to, is there an advantage to maybe a rate of admission? The answer is yes, it depends, and it does vary. So at many schools, there is a tangible benefit if you apply early. A lot of that is simply a reflection of there being a smaller pool of applicants within the early decision cohort. But other institutions will give you a little bump up in that process because they're kind of flattered that you're going all in with their school. I also know of some schools that actually have a lower rate of admission in early decisions. So they want to keep those spaces open as well. So unfortunately, colleges are not making it super easy across the board. But I hope that you'll find that if you contact us and if you look into our statistics online for whatever schools are on your list, you're going to find some more information there. So early decision is an option. It is not the only option. Most students at most colleges across the country in overwhelming numbers came by regular decision plans, and that's perfectly fine. And that's why we have them as well. So don't make your decision based upon what College Confidential says or what you think other students are doing. Really make it your own decision.
So I saw a question come in that I think ties really well into what you've heard about in terms of background context, and something that Corinne expanded on in another question we got. And the question was, do you guys consider legacy in your admissions process? And I love this question, and the answer I give you may not love it depending on who you are that's listening. But the short answer is yes. And the longer answer is we also are looking at students who might be first generation to college. Colleges have different initiatives and things they're looking at. I know we've specifically tried to look for more students coming from a rural background before, which is something that you're seeing some other colleges, work on as well. And so when you ask kind of, well, does this matter in the process? Everything is important. We're looking at all sorts of contextual pieces. There are some schools that might be more forward about whether or not a legacy connection to a school is going to be impactful in the process. But I just want to reiterate that, that is something that we learn about you in terms of your background, but I don't want to say it's no different, but it's pretty much no different from us looking at all these other different factors that a student might bring to our college campus in terms of those other pieces. So it's always going to be, if you ask me if we consider something in the process or consider something in your application, if it's on your application, yes, we consider it, but it's in context of 100 other moving parts that we're also looking at too.
I'm going to build off of that and the context piece, and just answer this really good question from Delilah, asking if preference is given to students who are able to pay in full compared to needing financial aid or loans. And that's really important to know that our institutions are need blind institutions. So when you apply, we're not seeing anything about your financial aid. That is not determining whether you are getting in or not. We're looking for students who are the best fit for our institutions. And then once they're accepted, we become need-based. So then your family will go online, they'll fill out the FAFSA and the CSS profile, which basically give us a lot of tax return information about your income and assets as a family, and that'll determine what you're able to pay. That has no impact on whether or not you're going to be accepted in our process, which I think is really important to know. And it kind of goes along with this other question that asked, or that basically said that our institutions are very expensive. And that's true. Our sticker cost, or that cost of attendance on our website, is very expensive. But often that means that we are able to give some of the best financial aid in the country. And so I encourage you all to check out on our websites, there's something called a net price calculator. It's required on every single university's website around the country. You can put in your family's financial information, and they'll give you a really good estimate of what you might pay at that institution. A lot of highly selective institutions are also no loan. They meet 100% of your family's demonstrated need. They provide to our lowest income students money for laptops and winter jackets and things like that. And so for students that need financial aid, we actually are quite affordable.
A couple of questions here about types of classes you take. Maybe you're looking at an AP option or an IB option or honors, dual enrollment, community college, maybe doing some of these over the summer. So what's our take on it? We always encourage students to first and foremost look at the opportunities within your school. So we're not expecting that you're going to be going beyond, because a lot of times there are limitations to doing that, not only with actual cost of taking classes or other experiences elsewhere, but also time and other commitments that you and your family might have there. So we expect students to really start with the context that they're coming from. That's how we begin our review, is that contextual piece. So look at the opportunities and programs in your school. If you have an honors program or AP classes or an IB program, if that's something that you're interested in and you talk this over with your teachers and the counselors, and this is part of your plan, then we absolutely encourage to take students, take that advantage, take that opportunity if this is something that you're interested in. But we don't, again, expect that you're going to be going beyond necessarily when you have all of these opportunities and options that are available to you in your school. But when we assess curriculum, when we assess what students are doing, we always look to see what you have within the walls of your school first. So that's really where we begin that part of the context review. And then wrapping it up quickly, students were asking about maybe doing summer options, prep programs or other community college programs, getting your summer ready. Again, if that's something that you're interested in, you have the opportunity to take advantage of it, you're absolutely welcome to do so. But we're not expecting that students need to go and pursue these very often expensive experiences when there's a lot of other options and opportunities that are available to you. So make this a family conversation. You know, ultimately, it's about living your life, doing the things that are of interest to you, and working with your family in each and all of these ways. So start there. And of course, if you have any questions, you know, feel free to reach out to us, but focus on you and your family and your community.
All right, guys, Mark, Corinne, Zach, I think that's a great place to end the webinar. There's some great questions here, more than 40, 45 that have just come in throughout the session. I'm just going to encourage you to, the audience, to reach out to college admission officers to get answers to these questions. These three college admission officers will be getting your contact information, so they will be able to reach back out if necessary. Otherwise, I want to say thank you for joining this particular session on highly selective college admissions. And Zach, Corinne, and Mark, thank you for your time tonight and the information that you shared with our audience. We really appreciate it. You guys have a great evening and have a great admission season. Be safe and be healthy.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Everyone.
Everyone.